is 7:20, and we now hand over to Sherrifa Tahir, who has got a guest today on the Coffee Hour. Over to you, Sherrifa.
Thank you very much, Darshan. A very good morning to you. It's precisely 7:20. And yes, we do have a guest on Coffee Hour because it's all about having very interesting conversations on a beautiful, morning. So usually every morning we do talk about something. So today we have a writer with us. He's a young writer, Murthaaz Bari. A very good morning to you, Murthaaz.
Good morning to you as well. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you for being here. And how are you doing this morning? It's cold outside, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And certainly not being a morning person, I can relate to the difficulty of this morning on another level.
Yeah, because it's been very cold these days, and on top of that, waking up in the morning, and then, coffee is the best thing.
Certainly, yeah.
Coffee does help in many ways. So we are here not to talk about coffee, obviously, but to talk about the younger generation in general, because you are one of them. And we see that social media is taking over, artificial intelligence is around, then many people are depending on social media in a big way. And sometimes, you count on your smartphone for everything, literally everything. If you need to do some calculations, if you need to go shopping, or sometimes to talk to the person right next to you. So tell us a bit about, in your opinion, as someone who practices, in promoting how one could have a leadership role and also stay away from social media. So, that doesn't come from a youth. It's not very normal here.
Certainly.
So tell me more about why you think that way, and what impact has social media put on the youth these days?
Okay, so first and foremost, I think the youth itself is a party, especially with this generation, the younger generation that's coming up. I think we generally call it
Gen Z?
Gen Z, exactly. With the generation that's coming up, I think social media has come to a point where it's quite synonymous with their existence. If most of their existence is social media, and I think it would be quite a stretch to say this, but there is some truth in it. Is the fact that if you are not in social media, you're technically not alive.
That's deep.
Yeah, that is a very deep thing. But I think that is the plight, I believe, in some way, of our generation. Just to clarify things initially, I was someone that grew up not with this sort of setting, without a setting of social media, without a setting of having to always keep my feed filled up, post stories often, and the general yada 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 that the younger generation goes through. But also on that note, we grew up with a generation that did do all of that did ensure that their lives were constantly kept updated on this platform.
It's like you need to do something every day.
Exactly.
Because you are supposed to show the world that you're busy.
True. And it is based on that point that it's not the fact that I'm completely against social media, because if at all, I study social media for a living to understand trends, to keep up with the world in some sense. It is just that I believe it has come to a point where most of youth especially have unfortunately tied up their self-esteem with their social media accounts. And there's also this prominent speaker who goes by the name of Simon Sinek, who mentions that we have all of these limitations on things like alcohol, on things like drugs, on things like sex and driving. There are licenses for these, and if you're not up to a certain age, you can't engage in things like this. But for social media, we don't have things like that. Exactly. And what he uses his metaphor where he says, when someone's feeling bad, you wouldn't, especially when it's probably a kid or a teenager, you wouldn't just tell him, okay, you're feeling bad, why don't you go and have a sip of alcohol from the liquor cabinet? And he uses that as a metaphor for social media. The liquor cabinet is social media in some sense, and we've sort of given this temporary solution of getting a jolt or a bit of a high from all of the likes and all of the appreciation you get, but that is it, and there is no real sort of sense of meaning behind what you do and why you do it. And there's also the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I'm also an actor. I'm a writer by day and an actor by night generally.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and as an actor, we are actually advocating for this campaign from one of our theater companies, which is this campaign called the WHATS campaign, and it's the WHATS technically stands for Why Are Teenagers So Sad? And we sort of delve into the depths of teenage sadness, especially in this generation, and it has sort of been an unreal understanding to figure out the fact that social media probably has a lot to do with this. And I believe that it is not about not using social media, abstaining from it completely, but it's also learning the art of maintaining that balance between not tying up your self-esteem, but also ensuring that you get the best benefit out of it.
Exactly, because there are ups and downs in everything, and they say too much of anything is not good.
Exactly, yeah.
So speaking of social media, I think, there's also this influencer game going on these days. So what's your take on that?
I think the influencers, see, then again, it is probably their best use of social media as well. And from that point of view, there's also this sense of advocacy that is taking place. And as much as I truly appreciate a few influencers that do advocate for the right things, but then again, just like you mentioned before as well, there's always the flip side of the coin as well. So it's always, I think, about dealing with this matter from a sensitive perspective, but also with a sense of mature understanding. I know it's quite ironic that we ask the younger generation to think of it in a mature perspective, but I also believe that we are capable of it because we always have been, and especially with recent times, I think the youth, the younger generation, have been taking action, have been very proactive in various fronts, be it in solving global climate change to solving big issues that the world has been facing for years now. It's the younger generation that's sort of stepping in the forefront. So I think personally it's to sort of not limit yourself and limit your mentalities just because you belong to this generation. You are more than welcome to sort of build your own regime, or rather your own thought process or whatever may supplement humanity itself. And on that sense, I believe that it can be dealt with a sense of maturity that the younger generation can work with.
Very true. And speaking of influencers, now I was on the topic of influencers. So being someone in the advertising field, I think you see that you got to approach people to even push products forward, or to spread the word. So do you think that the social media influencer campaigns are taking over advertising campaigns, traditional advertising campaigns?
Certainly do. I think especially, I think one of the first things you mentioned in the forefront of this conversation was also AI, which is another sort of tangent to this topic. But on that, it all falls on the same basket, where I think advertising itself has been completely revolutionized because of social media and because of digital innovations and digital technology, to the extent where now, like you mentioned, we have influencers sort of taking the forefront of the advertising field itself, which I don't really, it is a general norm, and it has been since the start of time, the advancement of technologies, the advancement of ideologies, and how people think, how people perceive things. And in that sense, it is ultimately growth. So I don't really have any criticism on that. But then again, there's always a sense of I think, again, maturity that you have to deal with these things with.
Speaking of that, I guess, even I'm on social media, so I've seen a few videos which says that traditional advertising campaigns are going to be back, and influencer game is going to fade off because there's too much of everything now. So do you believe that would happen with time because of how it's going right now?
Yeah, I think that has always been that has always been, I think, the case with society itself. There's always been this sort of upward slope of new trends emerging, and then there's been somewhat of a trough, and then again there's another set of slope that emerges, and people always tend to, however, base it on the same foundation. So I believe as much as advertising may vary from influencers to digital marketing to digital innovations, there's always the understanding that it has been built upon these principles that the entire field of advertising utilizes. So I think what happens generally is when something doesn't work or when something becomes a bit much, we always tend to sort of go back to our roots and rethink how it can be done. And I think that goes in line with your understanding of going back to traditional advertising.
Exactly, because I mean, when you give something for, like, when some person is, going on and on about a single thing and it's not restricted to it, but then you get calls from various other companies. So a person advertising for many things can also, cause a bit of a controversy, I'd say.
True, yeah, and I think that is generally dealt with contractually.
Yes.
But I'm not really sure with the semantics of that. But either way, like you mentioned, I do believe there might be somewhat of a direction towards traditional, not only marketing, but I think in a lot of fields, in a general sense, I feel like people are sort of realizing the importance of certain traditions that they have let go with the introduction of social media and technology and all of these developments. So in that sense, I do believe there is somewhat of a tendency for all of us to head towards this sort of traditional upbringing that we all, I think, look up to. Yeah.
Exactly. So we'll talk more about how a youth can get into more leadership roles and, how they could improve their skills and all that. But before we move into that topic, let's have some music, shall we? You're listening to Radio Sri Lanka. It is the coffee hour, and yes, we have Murthaaz Bari. We've been talking about social media, and we can go on and on about that topic. But before we, get carried away with the social media topic, let's talk about leadership and how youth can get into, becoming leaders and improve their leadership qualities. Just let's elaborate on that as well, Murthaaz.
Yep. Firstly, I think leadership in itself, as much as the word does sound a bit cliche and is overused a lot, leadership is something that is integral, I believe, for every single human being. And I think the biggest flaw of our generation and even the world we live in, rather, is this misunderstanding of what leadership is. And I think that mainly stems from the fact that a lot of individuals in society associate leadership with a sort of title. And I think the first thing is to break that, not only, I wouldn't say stereotype, but break that understanding. Because I think this prominent author, Robin Sharma, he generally, it's I think the first chapter in one of his books, and he also has written a separate book by that title, is to be a leader without a title. And what that basically means is you don't need to be the president of a country or the president of a society or the CEO of a company to be a leader. What he mentions is you are innately a leader in every sense, and that starts with every single action you carry forward, every initiative you take, every sort of the way you think, and it all complements this sense of leadership that you innately already have. And I believe
it's like tapping your inner self.
Exactly, yeah. And I believe the fact that a lot of people, they are leaders in a lot of ways, but because of this understanding that leadership is generally associated with a title, they limit themselves to what the confines that have been set for them, instead of pushing their boundaries and pushing their limits. So not only for the youth, but also for everyone else that generally has this misunderstanding, my first advice is to sort of break that ice and break that sort of mold you've been fit into since the start of time. The catch again with leadership is because of this mold that leadership is generally associated with the title. We have a culture of leadership, not only in the corporate world, but also it's very common in society, is this culture of leadership where what leadership is defined by the people in the higher ranks of these companies, of these organizations, where they decide to do what they want to do, and that is how it's done. And again, someone I really look up to is someone by the name of Simon Sinek, who also sort of breaks this stereotype, where he gives this analogy where, let's assume someone has not been performing well at work, he's been coming late to work, he's not been pulling his weight, his work is not up to standard. The general norm in any organization would be to go and tell this person, if you don't get your act together, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to fire you. So what he says is, as leaders, that is exactly the opposite approach of what should be taken. If at all, the approach that should be taken in reality would be something like, you've not been performing well, you've been coming late to work, your numbers are not up standard. Is everything okay with you? Are you okay? Is everything all right at home? Can I help you in any way? And what happens there is you have this complete switch of perspective, not only towards the leader, but also there's this sense of motivation to actually serve him to the best of your capabilities because he actually cared about you.
It's actually about wordplay as well, I'd say.
Exactly. And I think it is mainly generally based on a lot of empathy. So I believe empathy itself is somewhat of an integral pillar of leadership that a lot of youth have to mainly understand. And the reason I wanted to start off by mentioning that is because as youth, it is, I believe, our right to understand what leadership truly means as opposed to what we've been fed with. And in this generation especially, it's very, very easy to get carried away by propaganda, by things that people
and be entitled.
Exactly. And I think it is very very crucial for us to first set in stone what our understanding of leadership is, and then push ourselves constantly to realize that all of us have the capability and capacity to not only be identified as leaders, but rather to be leaders in every single aspect of our lives. And especially as youth, I think there was this quote, I can't really remember it verbatim, but it goes by the saying, it goes to say, if a country's youth does not lead, that is a dead country. And I think although it uses the metaphor of a country there, it works with any sort of setting, be it an organization, be it a company, if the younger generation, a household, exactly. If the younger generation is going to stay shush, is going to just do what they're told to do and not lead not only themselves but also various initiatives that could prospectively create change, what ultimately happens is we just keep living this same cycle again and again and again. And people don't realize the magic that youth hold. And it is very inspiring to see people across the world breaking that mold bit by bit. But I think that those limitations could be pushed a bit more. And this stems from people like Malala Yousaf, who regardless of adversity was always at the forefront of education. Comes from people like Greta Thunberg, who's pushing climate activism across the world. So the younger generation is picking up, and I think it starts with that understanding of actually realizing that as youth we have to lead. It's not even something we have a choice about. It is something we should do, because if we don't, we generally lose in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not about being entitled or being famous or anything about holding major positions. It's about trying to lead your life in the right way, isn't it?
Exactly. And because you mentioned lead your life in the right way, see, leadership again is also this action that has been stereotyped, I believe, by not only media but also by entertainment, by society, to the extent where when we picture leadership, it's always this sort of boardroom setting where either someone's shouting at the other person or someone's giving orders, someone's talking about numbers. But what people don't realize is leadership can break down to the smallest of actions. It can break down to something as minute as giving up your seat on a bus to another person just because that person needed that seat. It can be something as small as keeping the door open for the other person to walk through before you let go of it. And it's in those very, very small, minute subtleties and small things that leadership really exists, because you go out of your way to ensure that another person is actually doing much better than you are. And I think if we sort of get those principles of leadership understood the right way, not only will there be a revolution in the way we think, but I believe it is a very much needed thought revolution, especially for a country like ours, because we've been sort of fed this narrative of what leadership is, what our limitations are, and unless we cultivate a new generation of empathetic, kind, selfless leaders, we're going to always be in the sort of loop of being in amidst leadership that always has somewhat of a selfish gain towards it.
Exactly, and I think we need to break that, and we need to break that cycle. So it's about trying to understand where we are, what our passion is, and because sometimes we really don't know who we are. There are times we're trying to figure out, but that's okay, isn't it? Because we need to understand ourselves, and it's not easy to do that as well.
True. And that I really appreciate the fact that you brought that up, because I think, again, that is something that this generation specifically finds very hard to sort of cope with, is this understanding of who we really are. And the issue with that subject matter in specific is the metrics we are given to measure who we really are. And if you look at the general norm, and I know that this comes from somewhat of a South Asian mindset, or rather South Asian upbringing, especially across not only Sri Lanka but across South Asia, is this sort of metric of generally if you are good in your academics, if you have 3 A's, if you have this, and if you have all of these sort of accolades and medals and things like that.
Stereotypical.
It's very stereotypical. It is only then that you are sort of identified, okay, that's a successful child. Or rather, that's someone that has potential. And what happens is, it's this mentality that has existed for a while now, and people are now starting to realize how mundane it is, because they're seeing a lot of CEOs, founders of companies coming from quite the opposite setting. They're very creative, they're very innovative with the way they think. They don't have a lot of academic qualifications. And the fact is that I don't discount academia, but it is the fact that we use that as a metric to measure people's definitions of who they really are.
Yes, because people think differently, so sometimes they can't excel and they can't show you paper qualifications, but they probably are very creative, as you mentioned, and
exactly.
They are proper leaders from deep within, because as you mentioned, leadership doesn't mean to stay inside a boardroom and instruct people or give orders. It's about trying to, as I mentioned, trying to lead your life in the right way. So sometimes, as you mentioned, there are instances where we notice CEOs and people who come up with very creative ideas who don't have the paper qualification another person would. But it's literally about trying to figure out who you are, and once you do that, I guess you could grow. And parents also play a major role in this, and you mentioned about how the South Asian mindset is, and about the traditional upbringing, and also expectations, I'd say. So parents always expect the kid to excel in what they want them to excel. But there are parents who are very supportive of understanding what their kid's passion is and what the kid wants to do, because you need to understand what they're capable of initially, because there's no use pushing a child into doing something they don't know how to do, because that's not going to work.
Certainly, and on that note, I have to mention that a lot of my understanding and thought process is like this because I come from a parenthood of the latter that you mentioned, where my parents were able to sort of figure out, as in they gave it comes with a lot of trust, a lot of responsibility, but it's a sense of trust that you really appreciate, and it's the fact that they trust you're heading in the right direction, and they trust your passions and the things you want to do. And I believe that is sort of very integral. And because you brought parenthood into the conversation as well, I think one of the biggest mistakes we all make is we raise a bunch of educated people, but we don't raise people with hearts. And that is something I've noticed very clearly, especially with this generation. There are people with all of these academic qualifications, all of these accolades and achievements that don't know the art of actually empathizing, or rather being human in some sense. Which is why I also believe that if you want to have a healthier generation, it starts from the home, no doubt. But it starts from a home of values. And that is something that I gained from my home, which I'm truly grateful for. It was never about gaining the highest result. It was never about winning something. It was always about doing what was right. It was about being honest. It was about maintaining integrity. It was about being selfless. I know for a fact that if at all I did not have these morals, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today, and I am truly grateful for that upbringing. So I think if we try to cultivate an environment within our households of values as opposed to metrics of education, of things that are very mundane, palpable, things that can easily be taken down, if we focus on the impalpable things that we can't touch, like kindness, love, and selflessness, and cultivate those within our homes, not only will our homes head towards a better place, but also society as a whole would have a much more healthier prospect in time to come.
Exactly. And with that, I think time's up, and we've reached the end of the Coffee Hour program as well. So thank you so much, Murthaaz, for being a part of the show. It was a nice conversation, I'd say, on Coffee Hour.
Yeah, certainly, and I'm very grateful to all of you for having me today.
And wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much.
So it's back to Darshan this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Sherrifa. Well, that was really an interesting and fascinating discussion on the Coffee Hour. And where the time right now is 53 minutes past 7. A very good morning to you, and you're with Radio Sri Lanka on 97.4 and 97.6 and on www.slbc.lk.